everybody, welcome back to KSP 101 with what I believe is episode 16, if I'm keeping track correctly. A little bit of chalky milk there. Astronaut's drink of choice next to Tang. Anyways, it is time for us to wrap up our Duna mission. Let's make sure that there are no contracts that we want to grab before we review. Let's see, we're going to be bringing the Duna objective back with us, completing the return from Ike. We're going to be grabbing the science data from the space around Ike and what we're about to do. Bring the Duna stone back, check, and that will be completed by the time we get back. Before we get that station core out to Ike to finish the last of the presumed contracts that you can potentially get around Duna and Ike, let's go ahead and take a look at our Probodyne experimental stations and make sure that they are working properly. I mean, we could do that at the end of this, but I want to go ahead and knock it out now. Let's get some tunes going. I want to make sure these are working properly before we continue on. But as we do that, I'm going to explain again what we're going to be doing, in case you missed it in the last episode. What we're going to be doing is sending another station core like what we have around Duna, out around Ike, and then docking the vessel that we just landed on Duna and took back to Ike orbit. We're going to be docking it up with that station core and doing the transfer of Kerbal between two vessels. And that should be the last thing required in Duna, aside from all the stuff that we're going to finish upon returning from Duna. And then we should be ready to move on to Eve or wherever the World Record Society contracts take us. And if you've been playing along, that will also knock out a couple trophies or achievements on the Xbox. Let's work to the day side with this real fast and try to check this out. See, okay, there's our Duna modules doing their science. That's good. If I'm not mistaken, the goo is the only science being transmitted from here. Let's see, it's completed 16.67% of its science. And it has... okay, so it still has some science to go. Looks like it's barely transmitting, but it's transmitting. So we'll go on ahead and go to our map view and switch to... okay, we'll just switch to the flag since it's like right next to the ones on Duna. And we know that the ones on Duna are transmitting. We just got a notification for it. But we need to make sure they're all transmitting. There are two, the mystery goo and the weather analyzer. Try to wrap this up before we take up too much time in the intro here. Launching by about 5 minutes in or so. Alright, let's check this. It is transmitting, that's good. Let's check the weather analyzer. It is also transmitting, very good. So by the time we're home, those should be completely done with what they're doing. Out of curiosity, where are we? There's a very special anomaly on this planet, somewhere close to here, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, which if we zoom out, we may be able to get a look at. I'm not 100% sure though. Not sure where the north side or the south side is. We'll take a look. See, we might be too far away to be able to see this. I believe we are. But much like a certain surface feature in real life on Mars, you can find a very unique surface feature here on Duna. If I'm not mistaken, I want to say it's around here. But I wouldn't quote me, it could be somewhere else. You'll just have to find that for yourself. Let's say by the time we're done doing all this stuff in the tutorials, and when there's nothing else to do, I may do some Easter egg hunting videos, but we'll find out. If you're interested in seeing some Easter egg hunting, let me know, and I might do it. But for now, let's get back on track. Let's get back on mission. We are ready to go. 5 minutes elapsed into the video. Poetin didn't know it. That was cheesy, sorry. Moving on. Alright, now, we will go straight to the launch pad. We will grab the, is it the KSS one? I believe it's the KSS one. We don't have any other station cores created here, so I think it's the KSS one. And I believe the KSS one has everything needed and good to go, but just in case, we'll hit triangle or Y on the Xbox to edit the vessel, head into the VAV, it will load this up for us so we can take a look at it. And we should still have enough fuel on the lander to return from Kerbin even after doing this. We're going to have to put it back in orbit around Duna, perhaps. If not, I might just show how you transfer from a moon instead of a planet back to Kerbin, but I digress. We'll take it one step at a time. It's not a very powerful relay, but it's still powerful enough nonetheless. I believe this is pretty solid. Check our staging on it. Okay, good. Let's make sure there are no Kerbals on this thing. And we will launch it. Actually, no, let's return to the Space Center so we can go to the tracking station and line our orbital transfer window up. Making sure that we have a nice launch window to transfer to Duna. One more time, hopefully one last time, for now at least. Let's make sure by using the right shoulder button or R1 on the PS4 to select Kerbin as our focus, open up our time warp mode, max it out, and actually by the time we're done setting up this launch window, all of our surface modules for the breaking ground sign should be done. So it's up towards 30 now. Once we stop receiving those, we'll know that they're all done, I would say, but we'll leave them there and we'll make absolutely certain that 100% of the science has been completed. And in doing so, we also knocked out that contract. Now we just need to make sure to grab some science from the space around Ike before we head home and bring it home with us. Unless it's something that gives us no science for returning, in which case we'll just go ahead and transmit absolutely nothing and get credit for it, instead of having to worry about grabbing it and taking it home. Let's reopen our warp menu here. Try to get a good line of sight on Duna, which would be about there. Once we have our communication line lined up with Duna at the very edge of Kerbin's orbit, where it will be lined up with Duna, we'll cut our warp, or actually we'll move in closer and find the perfect transfer window and cut our warp there, and then launch the station core to Ike, dock up, do the transfer, set that station core to polar around Ike, finishing up our relay configuration. We might have ruined our... Find out. Yeah, it's a little ruined, but it's still good enough. If you zoom out and have Kerbin at 3 o'clock, and Duna is right above it, at a 90-degree angle from the sun, that's also a good way to find out when a ideal transfer window is. So let's leave the tracking station and just go ahead and take what we have and launch this station core out to Duna. Go to the launch pad, go down to the KSS-1 Kerbal Space Station, make sure there are no Kerbals sneaking on board unless a launch. Once we get to our launch pad, we will time warp to the day side so you can see the launch, see what we're doing. And we'll make our way to Ike. I have roughly 2 hours until I have to be at work, so that's plenty of time. It takes me about 30 minutes to get to work, 25 at the least. So we'll have to wrap this up by about an hour and 30 minutes from now. Should be plenty of time. Let's go ahead and time warp to the next morning, crack of dawn. Wait for that to rebalance. Once we don't see much bobbling and wobbling, we will set our SES, throttle up, and launch. We are on our way with our last mission to the Duna system for now. Hopefully wrapping up all possible contracts. While we're approaching that 100 meter per second speed, let's eliminate all these notifications for the breaking ground science. We're a little over 100 meters per second now, that's okay. Let's move it on over to the 90 mark until we hit about 175, 185. Let's, ooh, no. It's always fun to see, right? Let's revert to launch. Thought it staged, but the engines just kind of dropped out for a second there. That was my mistake. It's another 30 seconds or so wasted. Let's do this again, shall we? Try not to make any more mistakes. We should be loaded up here in just a moment. And let's time warp. Alright, now we got some daylight. Throttle up, let that balance out. Once it's done wobbling, SAS, launch. And very quickly get rid of these this time by hitting square or X on the Xbox. Alright, let's get our resource menu open, just for the fun of it. And we are at 100 meters per second. Let's start our rotation towards 90. Put it right over top of 90 while staying within the prograde circle, keeping a 90-degree inclination if possible. Should be close to 185. Move on over towards the 80 mark at a 90-degree inclination. Lock our SAS on 90 if possible, or as close to it as possible. There we go. Now let's go ahead and stay at the edge of our prograde mark, working our way on over towards that 90-degree angle. It will be time to stage soon, so we need to keep in mind that we need to stay close to the center of our prograde when it's time to stage. Here in just a few seconds, let's go ahead and move over, prepare to stage. There they go. Alright, let's keep on trucking over to that 90-degree angle with a 90-degree inclination. As always, don't push too far ahead, you'll lose control of the vessel. Lock once you get there. And let's go to our map view. Just waiting on that to hit 70k. Once it does, we'll go full sideways. Start pushing our orbit out. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do it once it hits about 60 or 65. It'll still climb as long as we're pointing towards the horizon and not too close to our apoapsis. Alright, let's go ahead and start turning over towards the horizon. We'll also go ahead and start rotating the vessel for when we need to stage those other tanks away. Nice and even on the plane of the horizon at the 90-degree inclination. Try to make it nice and even. There we go. Now we're just space trucking a little bit. Watching that apoapsis make some gains. Don't want it to push more than 100,000 meters or 100 kilometers. For those playing the standardized system in America game, I believe it's like 70,000 miles. I prefer the metric system myself. I think it's more accurate. Alright, we're in space, or almost in space. Let's just go ahead and deploy the fairing ahead of schedule. Lose a little bit of mass there. We can bring up our photovoltaic panels, highlight them both, and have them both ready to extend at 70,000 meters. Get that out of the way. And last time we were fine with just these being deployed, I believe. Oh no, that was the one we sent to Ike before. So now, I'm gonna set the camera to aim there so I can get a closer view and open up these communitrons just in case. I really doubt that we're gonna lose our connectivity, but better safe than sorry, as they say. While we're at it, let's lock prograde in advance, then extend these antennas, and if I'm not mistaken, the sun should be right ahead of us. Okay, I'm gonna turn our lights on. Don't have to worry about power. I like to look at it with its pretty little lights on. Alright, let's time warp to our apoapsis, about 15 seconds behind or so. Well, we do need to stop it a little sooner, maybe at about 20, so we can have time to rotate. Close enough. Let's go ahead and activate the throttle just a hair, so it can move to the prograde. Once it's there, build it up to full throttle. Oh, we just lost our outer stages. Time to stage those. Say goodbye to those. We will finish our circularization, which should be close to 2200 meters per second or so. Should start to see that periaps pop up here in a second. Here in a few seconds, we will cut the throttle once that wraps around about halfway, like that. It's pretty close. We'll take it. Well, let's zoom out to Duna, set it as our target, and do one last transfer to Duna. Hopefully. It's time warp around to the dark side. We have plenty of electrical charge. It's not really going to take too much to keep the lights on. We're using the smaller lights, and only about 4 of them, so. And once that retro target mark is close to retrograde, that means the prograde mark should also be close to the actual prograde target mark. So we should be about where we need to start the burn to transfer to Duna. Yes, we are. We are in fact way closer than it needs to be. We're a little behind schedule, but it'll still work. We will be just fine. Let's rotate a little bit. And once we hit the center of that prograde, let's go full throttle. And zoom out. And do our Duna transfer. Now, because we are a little behind, I'm going to disengage the prograde lock. I'm going to move it up to about maybe 7 or 8 degrees on the nav ball at a 90-degree inclination. Once we have that, then lock. Maybe raise it up to about 10, honestly. Make sure it's still at that 90-degree inclination. That way we can keep our prograde ahead of our target, where we are transferring at such a large distance to Duna. We want it to be a little ahead of the target. Try to force it up above that target mark on the nav ball. As you can see, the target mark is getting a little ahead of our prograde now. Hopefully neither of those moons get in the way. They are notorious for doing that, near perfect launch window times. Once again, once the apoapsis and descending node, let's go ahead and stage. Once those start to get close to one another and our apoapsis begins to touch the Dunan orbit line, we need to slow ourselves down a little bit and watch for that encounter to pop up. And then once they do, keeping an eye on our closest approach node. Once it drops down below 1 million, let's slow down and ease it in down below 100,000. Then we'll cut the throttle, ease it in. There we go. We have our encounter. Had to push out a little beyond Duna's orbit, but not much. That's okay. Now it's time to get ourselves corrected. We will go anti-normal to raise it, where we have multiple windows of encounters and leaving systems of influence, we have to burn anti-normal to raise it instead of normal to raise it. Let's line that up to the center of that, and we are going to cut our thrust limiter down to about 50% on that engine, and then get the Ike orbit line flush with itself, and then raise this up to where it is flush with that, and the other lines that we have there on the screen for orbital inclinations. Once we have that, we will cut the engine, and then we will, I believe, need to point retrograde, but we need to cut our thrust limiter now down below 0, or close to it. Let's also go ahead and cut our lights off. Well, we aren't going to be on the dark side for much longer, so I'll just leave them on. Now let's zoom out and set our target as Ike for now. How's our inclination looking? Fairly close. Alright, let's move that periapse. Okay, we need to be pointing prograde after all. Alright, so let's reorient to prograde. Once we're there, we'll start to plan our encounter with Ike. I like to come in on the 90-degree side, which is to the right, whenever I'm going to planets. On the moons, it doesn't really matter so much. Let's go ahead and move that in until we find out where our encounter is going to be. Okay, it's going to be on the other side there. There's a chance we can still get one on this side, but it's very low. So let's wrap around until we get our encounter over here. Nice and far away from Duna instead of the one that we almost had there. I believe if we come in from this side, instead of continuing our prograde burn, we should have that 90-degree insertion. So let's quick save and go ahead and manually activate our time warp. But before we do that, let's cut our lights off, just in case, so we don't lose too much power. Never know. And or quick save there after we turn the lights off, and then manually warp ahead once and see how much that affects the Ike encounter as well as that periapse. Just a little bit, and it pushed us a little bit further out on the 90 side, so that's good. Let's set that to 1 away from max until we leave Kerbin's sphere of influence, so we can see our Ike encounter. There it is. Wow, we're not going to be there very long at this distance, but it'll be fine. We're going to do a correction burn once we hit Duna's sphere of influence. Make sure we are still warping up here so it doesn't affect our Ike periapsis when we do this. Let's enter the Duna sphere of influence about halfway between the encounter with Duna and Ike's encounter, so about here. We'll warp there. Now we just wait until we get there. You can hit circle to exit warp mode while it's warping, and then you can use the left shoulder button to zoom in with the right stick without ruining the warp. If this is still turned on and you hit the left shoulder button, it will cancel the warp, so you can just hit circle or B on the Xbox to exit warp mode, and then you don't have to worry about that. You can move around, zoom in, zoom out, so on and so forth. And I believe Duna is going to pop up around here on our view relative to the sun. We just need to keep rotating to keep it lined up with that line of sight. And here in about 20 seconds we should see Duna pop up. And once we get there, we are going to burn radial in. No, radial out, because we're on the opposite side of Duna. And try to bring in our Ike periapsis to as close as possible to what it is relative to the lander that we recently just took back to Ike orbit. I think I see Duna right there coming up. Yep, there it is. There's Ike. Alright, now we need to highlight that Ike periapse and find out where radial out is, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so there's radial in. Let's go back this way to radial out. We may need to turn our thrust limiter back up just a hair, but we'll find out. We are still a pretty decent distance away from Duna and Ike, so it may affect it just enough, even at like 0.9 whatever it is on our thrust limiter. Let's lock onto that, go full thrust. Okay, so it's still affecting it fairly well, but not well enough. So let's turn that up to about 10, I want to say. As close to 10 as possible. Make sure that we're still locked on the radial out. And go full throttle. And we'll just gradually burn this down to wherever our vessel is. We can focus on Ike now, and then set our target as the D2 lander that we've been using. Check its apoapse and periapsis. So 121 is about where we want to cut our engines off on our periapse mark. Once it's touching that line, looks like it's a little high, doesn't it? Okay, so let's cut there, and then we will point, I want to say, anti-normal. Okay, we are heading towards the anti-normal. Good. Once we get there, we need to reduce our thrust limiter back down to about 1 or less, as close to 0 as possible, so we can fine-tune this. And if I'm not mistaken, anti-normal should be what we need to burn to lower that down, now that we are just under Duna's influence. Alright, so let's turn that thrust limiter back down close to 1 or below. There we go. See how that affects our trajectory line. See if it takes it down. Looks like it's raising it, I believe. It is. Okay, so we need to point normal. So let's rotate off to the other side to the normal mark. Once we get there, we'll lock onto it. And then while we're moving towards that, at the same time, we can make sure to try to get these lines nice and flush with one another, so we can make sure it's as close to an efficient burn as possible. I might have to close our communication network lines to get a better view of that, which you can do. I'll show you here after we get locked on to normal. Let's deactivate the SAS as soon as it crosses that, reactivate it. I'll go up here to comm network. You can cycle through by hitting X or A on the Xbox, turning those on and off. I'm going to turn it completely off for now. I'm going to get the orbital line with our vessel that we're transferring to nice and flush. Try to get a side view of it there so we can move the periapse line down to be in line with that, like so. Once the periapse mark itself touches that, see, now we're getting a degree of inclination node here. We can just keep an eye on that. Try to get it as close to 0 as possible, trying to keep it open so we can see it. Just waiting for that periapse to line up with that descending node, and then we'll cut off. That did bring us down a little bit, but it's fine. We'll keep it there. We'll need to point retrograde and advance. And then we will set our thrust limiter back to full throttle to prepare for that retro burn for orbital insertion. Let's quick save. And let's highlight our periap so we can keep an eye on it as we manually warp ahead 1 mark. Barely affecting it, but it is still kind of moving around a little funky there. Let's warp till we are about a minute away from that periapse. Refocus on our vessel as we move in. Hopefully we won't be too far off the retro mark once we arrive. Alright, very good. Let's re-highlight our periapse. And as soon as we see the orbital insertion, we are going to break throttle. So let's start burning right about now, at about 10 seconds away from the periapse. Oh, that's right, we have to reduce it down to like 300 meters per second, don't we? We should have burnt a lot sooner, but that's okay. We'll work with it. I don't think it'll matter much, to be honest. We're just waiting for this stage to deplete itself, as it definitely will, before we're done with this burn. Which will happen by about, I'd say, 900 meters per second on our orbital speed. So we're going to be burning for probably another 40 seconds or so. Regretfully, we should have started burning a lot sooner. Say at about 35 to 40 seconds away from the periapse is when we should have started burning. But it's okay. We'll be alright. We're definitely not going to finish this episode until we return home and are completely finished with everything we had planned to do. This is the Duna Finale. Wrapping it up. Okay, we are out of that stage. Let's go ahead and stage it. And we're going to bring this down to close to about, I want to say, 500 or 600. Maybe we should have an orbit by then. Might have to bring it down less, maybe even 400. Before we see that start to wrap around Ike. Look at that, that was interesting. Might have been able to have done a more complicated rendezvous and save some fuel, but it's pretty irrelevant, to be honest. We'll have plenty of fuel for what we're doing, and honestly I don't think we even need to refuel the lander either. Okay, now we should be swiftly approaching our orbit. Once we achieve it, we will cut the engine. And let's highlight our intersect 1 and 2 nodes. Actually, first go back here and reduce the thrust limiter as close to 0 as possible. Let's do a quick save. Let's highlight both those intersect nodes, our apoapsis and our periapsis nodes as well. And once we have those highlighted, we will slowly begin to do our burn. Keeping an eye on that periapsis too. We don't want it to drop too low down onto Ike. Want to be careful about that. Let's just let that wrap around until one of those give us an encounter. Our relative speed should not be too high, because the speed of our lander in orbit is 271 and we're at 310. So this is not going to be a very difficult encounter or docking at all. Never is around moons usually. And we'll just wait for that to intersect. We could speed up our thrust limiter, but I want to fine tune this and make it nice and tight, which we will also do a little more of by wrapping around to the ascending node and burning anti-normal until that is 0 and right on top of our encounter. And we should be able to zero out our separation, much like we've been doing. Once we get this intersection as close as possible, looks like we're going to go with intersect 2. It's coming up much faster. Alright, let's cut the throttle and fine-tune that down as close as possible to being right on top of one another with as little distance and separation as possible, which looks like it's going to be about 1.7, 1.6. So we'll take that, save, we will time warp manually once, see if it affects it. It does not. Actually, in advance, let's cancel that and aim at anti-normal, which is down this way. Once we get to anti-normal, we will lock onto it. That way we are already pointing at anti-normal and can warp to the ascending node and be ready to burn once we get there. Now, some of you may have encountered what's called a trim issue. I'm not sure if I've covered that, but I'm going to now. If you're holding the left shoulder button while moving the stick, you see those purple marks on the pitch and yaw? Those will stop you from having stable movement with your vessel. In order to reset that, see how it's forcing the pitch and yaw to do some crazy things on its own? And if you start burning, your vessel will lose control and maybe even destroy itself. To reset that, you hold the left shoulder button in, or L1 on the PS4, and hit the left stick in nice and smooth and gentle in order to get rid of it, and you will have control of your vessel restored to normality. So let's relock on that anti-normal. You can find shortcuts like that here in the control menu. Let's see, where's the trim? There we go. Okay, no, a little further down. Not seeing the trim on here anywhere. That's a shame. They really should have that on here because that affects a lot of things for a lot of people. Well, anyways, now you know. Now you can also find these shortcuts, in case you didn't know where those were either. However, you can go to settings, or actually not settings, but controls. You should be able to find the trim here. Yeah, trim axis, and then reset trim, right there under fly a vessel. Controls. Know your shortcuts. They can save your Kerbal's life. Anyways, let's go back to map view now. Let's do a quick save, and we will manually warp ahead 1 mark. And did that affect that 1.7? No, it did not. Very good. Let's highlight that and warp on over to our ascending node, as close to right on top of it as possible. Zoom in on our vessel, re-highlight our separation node, highlight the ascending node. Again, you can do that by hovering over the nodes and hitting square on the PS4 or X on the Xbox. Once you're nice and close to that, start burning. We do have a thrust limiter set pretty low, so it's going to move very slow, but we will be okay. Actually, let's turn the engine off, set that to about 9.51, that'll work. Re-highlight that, and burn until that's as close to 0 as possible. And wrap it around to the intersect node as close as possible, making sure that it is still at 0. Very good. Let's say that's about as close as that's going to get. Now let's see where we need to burn. It's looking like the target node is behind us. We'll point retrograde, and then we will set the throttle limiter back down to below 1, as close to 0 as possible. Highlight our separation once we are at retrograde. Let's burn. Okay, so we need to point prograde. And we'll try to zero this down to 0 distance on separation, or as close to it as possible. We can't lock radio in or radio out unless we do it manually, so I'm not really going to fool with it. I'm just going to try to get it as close as possible with Pro and Retro. That'll do just fine. And let's save. Time warp ahead just one little nudge, and then we will warp to about, let's say we can burn that down within a minute. So let's find out. Yeah, that'll work. Let's warp to about there, close to a minute away from our rendezvous. Set retro, go back to full thrust limiter. Once we have our limiter back up to full, let's see what our separation is. 15,000 meters. Once we're locked onto retro, let's make sure to change this to target mode. And once we lock onto retro, we will begin to slow ourselves down to about 50 meters per second or so. Hopefully it doesn't affect our separation too much, like it did last time. I brought it to 0.8 last time, but we're around the moon this time, so shouldn't affect it too much. Once we have that, let's go ahead and quick save, just in case. Krakens and bugs are not our friend. Let's time warp ahead 1, very good. Let's cut our distance in half. And then once we get there, we also need to cut our thrust limiter in half. It won't let us do it till we get there. Once it does, very good. Make sure we are pointing retro still. Let's check the distance from the vessel. About a minute and a half away. Let's time warp ahead a little further. Cut that in half again. Should leave us about 45 seconds until our encounter. Now we'll just finish this off in the regular view, close our warp mode, find our target, there it is. And once that hits about 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer, we'll slow down to about 10 meters per second or so. Or we could just do a suicide burn. Let's check how fast we can slow down. It'll take about 5 seconds now, so we'll do a suicide burn and show what that looks like. But we don't want that to pass about the halfway point behind our vessel, which would be from this view. Once it gets down to about 350 meters, we'll align that to that view, keeping an eye on it. Start to bring our speed down a little bit. It was a bit of a suicide burn, not quite, but close enough. Once it is directly behind us at that view angle, we'll reduce that down to about 1 meter per second, like so. Go to docking mode, activate the RCS, right trigger, slow it down as close to 0 as possible. You want it to really be at 0 relative to the target though. Once we have that, disengage the RCS, X or A on the Xbox to swap to rotational control mode, then realign ourselves to the target node on our nav ball. And then once we are over top of that target node, we will lock on. We are a little bit of a distance away, so let's use our engine to go up to about 1 meter per second. Maybe 5. We'll do this the hard way. Once we hit 5, let's move back around to retrograde very quickly so we do not smash into our target. As soon as we hit retrograde, we need to slow that back down very quickly to close to about 1 meter per second, if not less, like so. And we'll swap back to linear control mode and turn our RCS back on. and slow it down to about 0.1, 0.2. Deactivate the RCS, go back to rotation, and realign ourselves back to the target node. Not too quickly or you'll fly right past it. Or zip right past it, kind of like I did there just a little bit. Once we are lined up with that target node, we will lock our SAS and swap back to linear control mode. Turn the RCS on. Realign that prograde with our RCS and linear control. Let's go ahead and increase our speed to about 1 meter per second. That way we're not waiting forever for this. Alright, and along the way I'll deactivate the SAS, go to rotational mode, have those panels pointing up and down, relative, go back to linear mode RCS. Once we're nice and close, go ahead and turn these lights on too while we're at it. Now we're nice and close, making sure the prograde is still right over top of that. We'll slow on down to 0 meters per second. Deactivate RCS, swap our vessels, control from this port, target this port, then we'll line ourselves back up, but since we do have a pilot good enough to do this, we'll just set it to target. And we need to go back to rotation so we can turn the panels to where they're east and west. Alright, good. Now let's swap back over to this. And as we move it, the other vessel will stay aligned. Let's lock on to the target mark. Very good. Now let's activate, or actually go back, make sure to deactivate the target lock and just have an SAS lock. And then we'll move in and dock. Oh no. That can mess up our alignment, rotating with the RCS. Let's turn that off. Okay, there we go. Swap back to linear mode, activate the RCS, thrust in, make sure it's nice and lined up still. And I'm gonna set to aim the camera at that docking port to get a better view. Once we get close, we'll decrease the closer we get, keeping ourselves over top of that target mark, nice and centered on that prograde. Let's reduce it down to 0.1, continuing to make sure that it is over top of the target mark. Once we're this close, we'll just deactivate the RCS, deactivate the SAS, let the magnets take control, let them do their thing. Cool. A little bouncy there, but hey, we got it. Alright, now, the whole reason we did this, mainly because we failed to put one of these modules on what we took to Ike originally, is so we can transfer a Kerbal onto this vessel, and that should complete. See, we did the rendezvous, constructing the station, docking maneuver, and a crew transfer near Ike. Very good. That's all the stuff we can do in the space around Ike. Now, the other relay that we have in orbit around Ike has science on it. This one, unfortunately, does not. So while we're here, let's go ahead and just see if there's any science in the space around Ike we can bring home. We can get a little from that, we'll take it. Let's get Bob back into our primary vessel, and then have him pop out, going EVA to grab that science and restoring that mystery goo science part. Let's see, it's on this side, isn't it? Yes. Alright, let's grab that, collect the data, and then we'll restore that, just in case we land somewhere in Kerbin where we can get some more. And while we're at it, let's make sure to take that data from the command pod before we get back in, just in case we need to grab a crew report anywhere we go as well. Now we should have enough Delta V in our primary vessel to make it home, but just in case, I'm going to go ahead and transfer some of the fuel from this to try to fill it back up. We'll do one of these at a time. It'll be a lot faster than it was last time around Duna, where we're not filling up the outer tanks. There's less parts, less lag. Once we have those full, we're going to transfer back to Kerbin from orbit of Ike, which is a lot different than it would have been doing it from Duna. But you'll see how that goes here shortly, after we are done refueling. We're going to have to wait for a transfer window for that, so in the meantime, I'm going to set this station to a polar orbit. Let's go ahead and undock. Switch to our primary vessel. Get rid of the docking menu there. Go to docking mode, we're already in it. Go to linear mode, we're already in that control mode. Activate our RCS, SAS, boost away from the station. Once we're at a nice boosting away speed, deactivate the RCS and the SAS. Switch back to this. Now for the fun part. We cannot lock on to normal or anti-normal. We have to do it manually. So let's go to rotation mode and go to normal, since there is a dot in the center of it that we can keep track of. Once we are there, we will lock onto it and set our thrustometer back up to maximum capacity and begin our burn towards a polar orbit of Ike with the remaining fuel, while also making sure that we stay right on top of that normal node. Once we are far enough away from that vessel, we'll pick up more speed, a little bit more, making sure not to move that left stick while you're holding L1 to adjust your throttle. We're going to keep burning on normal until we hit that 270 mark, and by then we should be fully polar, and the vessel should be pointing sideways relative to the equator of Ike. Try to keep it as close to the dot as possible so it's not affecting your apoapsis or your periapsis. Once we are there, kick that engine off, check it out. We are now polar, and our apoapsis and periapsis did not deviate a whole lot. That's good. I'm going to increase the orbit a little bit so it doesn't smash into our primary vessel while we're time warping towards our return window. So let's increase it to about, let's go for about 200,000. It should be okay. About 200,000, then we'll warp over to our apoapsis. Before we do, point retro. So once we arrive at the apoapsis, it'll be pointing prograde. And once that's locked on to retrograde, let's activate the time warp now. Very quickly locking onto prograde. So once we get there we go. And then we can adjust our periapsis to be 200,000 or so. That'll work. Now if I turn this back on to full network, there we go. Now activate time warp and you'll see this network in action. I don't think there's any dipping out in the network now, really. It's looking mighty good. It dips out every once in a while down to 1 bar less, but that's it. It's looking good. Let's go to our map. Yeah, we were already in map mode, weren't we? Go to map and zoom out. Find Kerbin. And at this distance from Ike, we might be able to go, yep, full. And if the nav wall's bothering you, just click that arrow, get rid of it. And instead of going to the tracking station, we can just stay here where we are, at this distance from Ike with the relay station. and time warp until we have our launch window and save ourselves some time. Now we're just waiting for that alignment. And we definitely have too much fuel for this, but over-engineer. Never hurts. Unless you're playing on moderate or hard and money is tight. And it's been a while since we've checked our funding. Right now, money is definitely not tight. But we're gonna need all that money for future missions like all the Jewel missions. Those vessels, they're gonna get pretty expensive. Now let's set our focus on Kerbin, like we would in the tracking station. Let's highlight Duna and Ike and zoom in on Kerbin. See if those disappear on us. Oh, they kinda do. Let's zoom back out, making sure we're keeping an eye on our window here. Just waiting for that. Once it gets nice and close, we will quickly zoom in, and waiting for that to reach the edge of its line, about there, we will cut the warp, zoom back out, wait for Duna to get nice and red again, and we will zoom back in. It's fairly close, we'll take it. Let's refocus on our vessel, and then zoom in, and then find our primary vessel that we're taking home, switch to it, and once that loads up, it'll be time to line up Ike where it needs to be around Duna relative to Kerbin to make the transfer back home. And that's the fun part about transferring from moons instead of planets. The moon around the planet has to be about where the vessel should be around the planet when you transfer to another planet. So right now, we're on the opposite side of where we need to be. Let's activate our SAS so we can stop that spin. And activate our time warp and move Ike around to the other side of Duna. Before we go any further, let's set Kerbin as our target. And we want our vessel to be at the edge of its orbit, at the edge of Ike's orbit, both lined up with Kerbin to do this. If you can't do this or don't have confidence in doing it, go back to a nice close Duna orbit and do it the way that we have been making our transfers. If not, come along on this journey with me. So we are very close to where Ike needs to be. Let's be very careful. Let's go ahead and make a quick save here just in case our next pass around Ike is not any better. But we're going to make one more pass around Ike to try to get Ike lined up a little better with Kerbin. And see if we can do that. We're going to cut the warp about here. Looks like it passed a little beyond where it needed to be. So either way, I think it would have been the same results, to be honest. Would have been a little better taking what we had originally, but once we get close to the edge of our orbit here, let's point prograde and see where our target marker is relative to our prograde mark. Pretty close. Let's warp it in just a little more where the edge of the target mark is in the center of our prograde. Now it's time to burn. Let's activate our engines. Now let's see how this works. Alright, let's cut that off for a second. Take a look. We should be burning inward. And we are. And in fact, this transfer will take less delta V, if I'm not mistaken, than doing it from Duna. But we'll find out. It all depends on that ascent node meeting the periapse node right on top of Kerbin's orbital line. It might be a little off, so we'll keep burning until we get that encounter. Making sure that we're at a 90-degree inclination. We're 1 degree off. That's okay. It's fine. Set our focus on Kerbin in advance. And that's getting really close to Kerbin's orbital line now. Waiting for that encounter. Alright, let's cut that off. Highlight our separation node. Bring that down to about 100,000. And then slowly bring it in. Just waiting on that. There we go. Now let's zoom in on Kerbin. Now that we're focused on Kerbin, find out where we're going to be. Okay, so it's not going to show us until we leave Ike's sphere of influence. Let's highlight that Kerbin encounter and save in case it throws us off. And we will manually time warp ahead once. Okay, good. Now we just need to time warp until we leave Ike's sphere of influence. Once we do, we should see that very good. Let's disable the time warp, zoom back in on Kerbin, and reduce our thrust limiter down to about 5. That'll be okay. Let's highlight that periapse and move that Kerbin periapse down into about 40,000, I want to say. Should be okay. But once we're close, like about there, we do need to point normal so we can lower this axis down to a nice clean insertion. I guess anti-normal. Let's burn anti-normal until it's nice and flush to the center of Kerbin. A nice 90-degree orbital insertion, which would be about there, I'd say. Pretty close. Let's go back to prograde, since I believe it should be prograde, since we're still under the influence of Duna now. Let's slowly bring that in to about 40,000. Once it reaches about 100,000, we'll cut the engine, and then really reduce that thrust limiter down as close to 0 as possible, and finish our burn down to about 40,000 meters, just tapping it in. Once it reaches about 40,000, we will cut, save, and we need to find out which side of Kerbin we are coming in from. See, our Kerbin escape is over there, so let's zoom out. We're gonna time warp ahead just a hair, make sure we quick saved. Watching that periapsis, see if it gets affected. Not much, good, we'll take it. We're gonna time warp to right before Minmus. Okay, so we can't until we leave Duna's sphere of influence. Let's time warp ahead a little more until we do leave that sphere of influence. And keeping the time warp going, left stick in, highlight right before Minmus, and warp there. And our periapsis should be fine still. It's a very precarious thing. Now we wait. Let's try to get an eye out on Kerbin coming in. Let's see. Relative to Kerbin, where are we going to be coming in? I'm going to be coming in from the outside. So it'll be the opposite side of Duna, if I'm not mistaken, the way we approached it. So like somewhere around here, if not behind us perhaps. Just want to get a good view of Kerbin as we approach it. If anything, there it is, yep. Right over there. Coming in hot. 10,000 meters per second. It'll change once we get there though, but it will pick up speed the closer we get to Kerbin. Let's zoom back in on Kerbin, make sure we're not going to hit any moons. Highlight our periapse. We don't want that to be any lower than 35,000 meters coming back from Duna. We're going to be coming in pretty hot. But no higher than 45,000 either, or else you'll leave right back out of the atmosphere, unless you slow down enough. Alright, so for now, we are not going to hit Minmus. We're going to be very close, but we're moving fast enough to avoid it. Let's manually time warp ahead 1. Periapsis is fine. Let's warp right in front of the Mun. Make sure we don't hit it. It's going to be pretty close. Always terrified of those moons. Let's continue our time warp until we are a little closer to Kerbin. Don't go in too hot though on your warping. Maintain control. Else you're just going to fly right through it. Alright, let's cut it there. Let's check our altitude. Alright, so if we cut that in half, that should be close to about 600,000 or 700,000 meters. Whoa, it's even less. Okay. Let's go ahead and cut that in half as well. See where that puts us. Hopefully no more than 70,000. Very good. Okay. Very quickly, point retrograde. Activate the engine. And then once it gets to retrograde, set it back to full throttle on the limiter. Set it to surface mode. And I know it's dark, but we can still see our solar panels are not retracted. We need to retract those very quickly before we hit 70,000 meters. We are now in orbit of Kerbin. That's why the view shifted there partially. We are now in Kerbin's atmosphere. We need to keep an eye on that. Now if we wanted to, we could cut right here and get rid of that stage, but I'm going to keep burning to try to reduce the speed as much as possible. Alright, now we're burning. Let's go to stage. Get rid of that. Go to docking mode, turn our RCS on, and try to move away from that so it doesn't smash into us if it happens to come back at us. Which it might, unless it explodes. If it doesn't slow down enough. Let's disengage our RCS. Go back to staging mode. In fact, actually, let's turn our RCS back on to maintain control as we approach the maximum G-force as we are slowing down in the atmosphere. And I think these are already engaged. No, they are not. Okay, very good. Now we're just waiting. Let's also try to figure out which ones are drogues. Put them in their own stage as we are burning through the atmosphere, locked onto retro relative to surface mode on our nav ball. Again, let's get these drogue chutes in their own stage very quickly. Should have already done this. It's that poodle engine stage still blowing up there ahead of us as it's burning through the atmosphere. No worries. See, there's a drogue. We need to lower it down into this stage. I believe that should be all of the drogues, maybe one more. Yep, there's a drogue there. So now we have all of our drogues staged together here, if I'm not mistaken. We'll find out. Looks about right. Yes, it does. Okay. Now these are just the regular larger radials, yes? Okay. Now we have finished our entry burn just about. Once we have completely finished that, let's go ahead and activate our drogues now that they are safe to deploy. Nice view of those with the lights. We're still at a pretty safe altitude. We'll just time warp down until those drogues deploy. That should keep our speed safe in the meantime. And actually go ahead and deactivate the RCS while we're warping. And once those deploy at about 2,500 meters, looks like we are heading to a splashdown. Once those do, we'll hit circle to close warp while still warping. Once we get close to the surface of the ocean, we'll activate our primary parachutes, bringing us down at a nice slow 5 meters per second. Let's deactivate our time warp, deactivate our SAS, so we're not wobbling around like that as much, and finish our time warp. And you can deactivate the time warp by hitting square or X on the Xbox, as explained before. I'm going to hit the center touchpad to disable the UI, zoom out, and then hit the right shoulder button since we're still in warp mode. You just can't see it, like so. And I'm just going to keep an eye on that vessel until we get nice and close to the water. And once we are, I'm going to deactivate warp by hitting square or X on the Xbox. Just make sure you have warp mode open still. You'll see it highlighted up there in the top corner. Deactivate and let it land on its own now. And we have made it back. Our mission is complete. I should get a few updates here. Let's see what we have. Explore Ike is finished. We have returned home from the surface of Ike, and we have returned home from the surface of Duna. All because we brought that specific pod that we landed on Ike and Duna back with us. And I don't believe there's any science we can gain from being out in the ocean anymore, but just in case, let's check. There's 4 science, we'll take it. We might even be able to EVA our scientist and check the surface sample out, and maybe get a little more out of that still too. And 0.8, it's still something, let's take it. Alright, let's check our missions. We have returned from the surface of Ike, and once we recover this vessel, we will have the scientific data from the space around Ike. We will have the Duna Stone and the Duna Ejecta, which is all stored in our command pod, which you can check by going down here and reviewing the stored data. Surface sample from water, mystery goo from Ike, Duna's lowlands, 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 upper atmosphere, lowlands, just so much science. We're gonna get a lot from this. And we're gonna finish off that tech tree, maybe. Alright, so that's all of our science. Let's recover that vessel. And see what all we get. That was fun. That concludes our Duna and Ike missions. There should be no more contracts for either one of those, if you have done all that. Let's see what we have. Should be finished loading right about now. Come on. Come on. There we go. We have gained quite a bit of science. Not only the science from the mission that we gathered, but all the science from the contracts, the accomplishments, stuff that we transmitted. There's so much science. And I'm not sure how close we were to the Kerbal Space Center. Pretty far away, so we didn't get too much back from all the stuff attached to that pod that we recovered, including all that monopropellant. And a little bit of the ablator that was still left after burning into the atmosphere at such a high speed, but we got a little bit back from that, nothing special. And they gained some XP, but they didn't level up to level 5. Still, somehow. We need to send Jeb out next time to get him caught up, don't we? I believe we do. Okay, so let's take all that, go to our tech tree, and maybe spend some science. Let's check our contracts first. We are heading to Eve. We need to fly by Eve. It says nothing about coming back, though. So let's send a relay out to Eve first in the next mission. And what all contracts are relative to Eve that we can take? Build a new orbital station around Eve, USA. 11 Kerbals? Pfft, nope. We're not doing that. Surface deployed seismic from the Mun. That's it. Just fly by Eve. Alright. Oh wow. Okay, so that technically wasn't a Duna Stone, I guess. Let's decline that mission. We're not going back. We got 137 in advance. We're gonna have to pay out 185 for declining it. So we're only losing about 50,000 or so. I think we can spare it. We'll still be above 5 million. So let's hit square or X on the Xbox and decline that. Or, if you want to, you can spend the money to go back and get that. Or, if you're just now watching this, you can also plan to grab that while you're on Duna. But I'm just going to decline that. Okay, So our next episode, we're heading to Eve. Eve is a nightmare. Eve has so much gravity and such a thick atmosphere. So you have to be very careful with Eve. Oftentimes, I'd say 99 out of 100 players, if you land on Eve, you're not leaving. You're not making it back. Unless you really know what you're doing and can build a vessel capable of taking off from Eve. And by capable of taking off from Eve, I mean it's got to take a vessel you launch from Kerbin and make it about 30% stronger in its thrust to weight ratio, and 30% more fuel, 30% more everything. It's a beast to try to leave Eve, but hopefully we don't get that contract, so we don't have to cover that just yet, because it is very difficult, and I do not think we should be covering that this early in the tutorials. But we should not get that contract until we have made it out to Jewel, Elu, Drez, and Moho. That should be one of the last contracts in the game. It usually skips returning from the surface and saves it for the last of the contracts, I believe. Thankfully. But we'll get to it eventually. I have done it once or twice. It's not a very easy thing to do, though. Alright, so we have our contract. Let's go spend some of this science and get what else we might need for some of these Eve missions. I mean, we really have everything, but we do need a better probe core. We definitely want that probe core, so let's go ahead and get that. I think it's high tide that we start launching from the Mun too. Now, if you're playing on console, as these tutorials are made for, and you have the historical DLC, Making History DLC, you should have the Mun launch site on the Advanced Science Tech here in the tech tree. And if you do, go ahead and unlock it by unlocking this first, which also gives us a new science part to use for more science that we can take to all the various biomes that we've already explored, but it is atmospheric, which means it has to be on an atmospheric world, and there are only 4 of those, I think, which are Kerbin, Duna, Eve, and Lathe. Lathe is a moon around Jewel. Oh, and Jewel too, of course, but you won't land. But you can still do the atmospheric science of Jewel as well. So let's take that, and you'll also get a larger scanning arm for your vessels or rovers. We'll take that, and then we'll unlock the Mun launch site as well as another science part, or 2. This one's for moons, or non-atmospheric worlds. It's a Breaking Ground science module, and this is for kind of the same, like non-atmospheric. You have to be in space to use the GravMax gravioli detector. So that's more science we can do, and that gives you quite a bit of science when you use it, actually. But also the ability to mine and do what's called ISRU, and rendezvous fuel conversion. So you can mine for ore and use a converter to convert it into any type of fuel that you might want or need, as well as the ore storage tanks. Very small, some very large, some incredibly large, like a 2.5 meter. So we'll unlock that. We're not going to unlock this one though just yet. We're going to save some of the science for other things. We aren't going too far from the sun just yet. In fact, we are heading closer to the sun, so we will not need the solar arrays just yet. We'll leave that alone for now. I do believe it is time to definitely try to get to unlocking that heat shield, because burning through Eve's atmosphere for entry onto the surface of Eve, you're going to feel the heat. You're going to need that. Wouldn't hurt to get the larger landing legs either to get to unlocking that. We'll keep those in mind. Relatively cheap. Actually, let's go ahead and get those then. And we don't need the grabbing arm just yet. Not planning on redirecting any asteroids just yet. I do like that docking port though. That's a very useful docking port. Good for putting on top of vessels without having to put a fairing or nose cone on top of it. But for now, we will leave that alone. See what else we need. A larger fairing. That might come in handy. Larger tanks as well. Nose cones. Other than that, there's not too much here we need. But it does lead to a multi-point connection hub for a station. You just have to put the docking ports on each side of it. It also gives us the largest nose cone and an even bigger fairing, as well as this new docking port. Both very useful. Believe we try to get that. Otherwise, I'm not seeing too much else we need just yet. Ion and Xenon, very useful for satellites. And that probe core is also useful for larger unmanned vessels, and I mean really large. That's a 2.5 meter probe core, much like the Rocco Max tanks. The nukes too, but we won't need those until we're far from the sun as well, so none of this. Don't need, stronger relays. Let's get that. Now we can build the strongest relays possible. And we didn't need anything else down here, I don't believe, except for that, but it costs too much right now. I guess we will go ahead and try to get the new fairings and that for the multi-port connector for docking. Make sure this is the one that we wanted. That comes with a fairing. Good. Alright, so we have all the largest fairings now. Our multi-port docking hub. We only have 273 signs left. There's not really much we can get with that. So I guess that's all we're going to do in our tech tree in this episode. Close to being finished with it. Here soon, we could also go ahead and start planning on sending out a Skylab or Space Lab to really finish off this tech tree if we wanted to, which we may do in the next episode, or we may trudge on to Eve. We'll find out whenever we get to that. Let's go to our tracking station, do a little cleaning up to wrap this up. It is almost 3 o'clock. I have to be at work in about, 30, 45, 50 minutes. So I have about 20 minutes until I have to leave. Make sure there's nothing we need here. Let's get rid of this. Go back down, get rid of that other piece of debris. I believe our Probodyne experiments are done. There's our failed mission. Let's get rid of that. And then there's the other contracts. Get rid of those. Eve flyby is all we have now. I'm pretty certain these are done. So let's go on ahead and terminate those. We haven't got a notification for those in a while. I think they're depleted. So we have our MUN relay, our Kerbin relay, our 2 Duna relays, one being a station. The other one just being a relay. This is technically a station as well, but it's primarily a relay that has no more fuel on it. That's all it's going to be used for. We'll keep it classified as a relay. The KSS still has fuel on it, if I'm not mistaken. Where's the mass? Oh yeah, it still has fuel. And it is a station, so we'll double tap its name, triangle over to station, hit X or A on the Xbox to accept those changes, hit the left stick in so we can do that, and then unhighlight that information panel so we can move around again. And there's our communication network so far, denoting the progress that we have had in our tutorials. We have conquered Kerbin and its moons. We have conquered Duna and its moons. Now it's time to begin conquering Eve. Not an easy place to conquer. Let's take a look. Here is Eve. Quite the beast of a world. Lots of room to land on one side, not so much on the other. Lots of ocean on that side. It's relatively flat in most places. There are some rolling hills. There are plenty of mountains still. It's a very dangerous world though. If you check out its information, Eve is certainly the purplest object in the solar system. It's one of the larger, most visible objects, mainly because its very, very purple tint. It is considered by some to be almost a sister planet to Kerbin, much like Venus is in real life, with Earth. Well, despite the purple and the toxic atmosphere and the extreme pressures and temperatures, actually, it's not very similar at all, is it? Who are those people? Let's check out some characteristics. See, its ASL gravity is 1.7 Gs. Now, compared to Kerbin, with its ASL gravity of 1 G, which all of this is based on Kerbin gravity, so it's a 0.7 increase on the ASL gravity. Now, ASL, that term should be familiar if you have been checking your engine information. It'll show you its in-atmosphere ability to push tonnage through how many kilonewtons of thrust it has. Like the swivel has the ability to push about 15 tons max. So here it would be much less. A swivel would probably only be able to push about 8 tons on Eve, I would say. Maybe less. It's quite the beast. Its atmospheric height is at 90,000, if that tells you anything. That is 20,000 meters higher than it is on Kerbin, where Duna is 20,000 meters less, with a weaker atmosphere. Like, you won't need nearly as many parachutes to land on Eve, but you will hit the ground with more mass because of its gravity. Now, you won't be going very fast, but you will weigh more. Let's see what else. Really, that's it for now. Let's see, ocean. Well, we can't really see that because we don't have anything around Eve to show us this. We have to do an orbital survey first. Yeah, it's not going to show us anything without anything in orbit to do the survey, but it's pretty clear where the oceans are and where the surface is. So, that's enough about Eve. Let's move on to its moon, Gilly. It's basically a small asteroid. Very small, almost no gravity at all, quite the opposite of Eve. Its gravity is 0.005. It is very hard to get an encounter and land here at Gilly, where there is not much gravity. You can take one step on Gilly and end up dozens of meters away from where you hopped. You can turn your RCS backpack on, thrust up a little bit, end up dozens if not hundreds of meters from the surface. In fact, I've even heard that you can take your RCS backpack and make orbit off the surface of Gilly with a Kerbal. But that tells you just how low the gravity is here, and how difficult it can be to land on this moon. But we're going to have some fun and get to that in later episodes. Not too many more episodes until we get to that episode. And it is a good distance away with a very eccentric orbit of Eve. Like where it is now, it is approaching upwards of 40 million meters away from Eve. So not only is it hard to land and control yourself on Gilly, it's even harder to get there. But we're going to cover that and make it look easy. And you will master the Eve system much like we have the Kerbin system and the Duna system when we get to it. But for now, that's all we're going to do in this episode. It's time for me to wrap it up and get ready for work. We will leave the tracking station, go back to the Space Center. There is nothing else for us to do aside from making sure all of these are fully upgraded since we have the fundings to do it. Don't need to worry about the runway or the space plane hangar just yet. Everything else is fully upgraded. So let's save. We'll do a quick save. Then we will do a main save. And that'll be it for episode, I believe, 16 of KSP 101. Thank you for watching. Hope you had a good time with our Duna and Ike missions. I'm very much looking forward to going to Eve. In the next episode, we will probably send a relay station core like we have around Duna and Ike, but with much more fuel. Because it's hard to make orbit around Eve and even harder to leave orbit compared to Kerbin or Duna. For now, that's all. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.